This is Tom Fox. Welcome to part two of a special five-part podcast series on operationalizing compliance sponsored by Broadcat. In this episode two, we take up design. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Jennifer May and Xenia Pirkey, both with Broadcat. And we're going to talk about what I think, I have to say, is Broadcat's strength, which is design. And it's been your strength from the minute the company was formed, literally up to today. So I wanted to really have you guys explain your process and how you not only create the great designs that Broadcat is known for, but equally importantly, how do you work with your clients on an interactive basis to get them to understand that and then allow them to work with you, and most importantly, have the engagement with their employees. So with that incredibly long-winded introduction, could you tell us what's maybe start with the internal Broadcat process and how do you guys all work together?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Xenia and I have worked together now for a little over a year, and it's just been such a great experience for me coming from the compliance side of the house and then joining Broadcat and really understanding and having a better appreciation for what design can do to really help a message get delivered. I think design can be dismissed too easily. When I use that term, I'm not just talking about making something pretty or interactive or entertaining. Those are sometimes the outcomes. But I think a lot of people stop with just thinking design is about prettying something up or branding it up. And what we do at Broadcat and what we're able to achieve with our clients is to really think through a well-designed program that includes not only the messages that we're sending and the information that we're providing, but the way that we're doing it with a visual a component to it. So that aesthetic, that's something that draws you in. You see something that looks nice and you want to explore it a little bit more. The content then grabs and holds your attention. But I think the magic really happens is when you're able to translate that into something that can influence the behavior of the individual consuming that piece. That, for a compliance officer, allows them to start looking at this information in a way that truly speaks to effectiveness. And they can start to track and monitor whether or not the behaviors and the outcomes that they're looking for are really happening with it.
There's a couple of phrases I want to utilize here. One is you use, Jennifer, which is where the magic happens. And my daughter's a graphic designer and she uses that. I am a lawyer by professional training. And so engagement and user experience were never part of the equation, ever. But what I've really come to understand is that as important as everything we talk about compliance is, I think it may just come down to the user experience and just UX. And so I really wanted to maybe ask you first explain what you mean by user experience, or if we use shorthand UX, but also that is not simply, as you said, looking great, feeling great, but it's clarity of message and relevance to the employee. So could you maybe unpack some of those concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are the keys, relative relevance and clarity. If it's not relevant, it doesn't matter how perfect the design is or even how perfect the message is. If it's being shared with someone that's the wrong person, it's going to fall flat. You're just wasting time blanketing the entire workplace with some piece of information that doesn't apply to most of them. I've been guilty of that in my career. I'll be honest with that. Sometimes providing some sort of training on maybe administering a medical treatment that ultimately had to go to the finance team too. And I'm not sure why, looking back, other than maybe some regulator told us we had to. But those messages fell flat because the relevance wasn't there. It wasn't purposefully related to their job. And then the clarity. You're absolutely right. Once we have their attention, maybe it is the right audience. Hopefully it is the right audience. If you're not clear about what it is you want them to do, what the behavior is that you're trying to, you're going to lose their attention there as well. And again, wasted time, wasted effort, and potentially even starting to lose some credibility. And so I'm going to ask Xenia to continue explaining from her perspective too, but this is where I feel like Broadcat and our philosophy is that good design, top to bottom, can really help to mitigate those issues and get to ensuring that you're bringing that relevance and clarity each time.
Definitely, like Jennifer was mentioning, a lot of times we take design and we use it from our side of, from my point of view, we use it to the like a lot of the content has to be on point for sure. But the audience that will receive it, we have to think about them and who we're trying to target here. We have to be specific a lot of times on what we're trying to project to them. And so we come in as designers and try to add to that. But we, for one, start with content. Content is king pretty much. We try to emphasize on that. As a designer, I come in and I try to interpret what Jennifer did or whoever wrote the content did. And I try to interpret as much as I can and ask the questions, because a lot of times after Jennifer has written the content, I come up with other questions about, okay, who is this? What am I trying to say? How do I want them to read this step by step? If we're depending on what we're creating, of course, whether that's a flow chart, a checklist, whatever it is, we have to think about not only the audience, but also how we're projecting to them. And we leverage design in that in various ways, but putting a perspective from every person that can will be impacted by our product is really important for sure.
So, the Department of Justice has given us some guidance here, and they talk about effective training and targeted training. But what I'm hearing from you guys is really a whole subset of levels leading to effectiveness. I've used the word engagement. You talked about clarity. So, you guys are really able to break down the process of what the government has said to us in a way that is more detailed. And I really like what you said, Jennifer, the credibility, because I interviewed a former Army officer who did training, and she said credibility and training for her was the key. Because if the training wasn't effective, she and the training lost credibility. And
Yeah.
so that hurt her in the long run. And I really had not thought about that from the compliance perspective. But your credibility is probably the biggest thing you have as a compliance professional, because all you have is the ability to persuade. I was wondering if maybe you could take us through the broadcat creative process so that we might understand how you're able to take a comment from a Jennifer who has a different professional background than someone like me, so that if a lawyer steps in and gives thoughts, and Xenia, you're a completely different professional background. So how do you guys make the magic work? If you can let us see the secret sauce.
Yeah. Xinia, you want to take that?
Sure. For one, we start with content, like I was saying. Content is key, and whenever content's written, we try to, Jennifer will talk about it a little bit that, but we try to make sure it's as simple as we can. We simplify a lot of times our content to make sure we're speaking to the audience the way they will interpret things. And so after that, I get the content from the person, the SME who wrote the content. And so I take a quick dive into what it's saying, how it's been explained, and everything. And a lot of times, this means that we've come up with a format, whether that's a decision tree, an infographic, a job, the way that we want to project that job aid to our audience. And so other times we might not have it defined yet, but throughout the process we'll narrow it down. And yes, a lot of times we have to go back to the drawing board and decide, okay, this didn't work as a decision tree. We probably have to revise it and think about a different format. Maybe is a contrast example that we have to show here, or things like that. And after that, I take it into production. I start playing with the layout, how we wanted to lay out each section, or maybe it's laying out the questions to make sure the audience is looking from the top to bottom, not skipping through the process. And we go through a lot of editing throughout, of course. We're looking at it, we keep editing out things, removing things that we thought were important and maybe they're no longer that important. And of course, we use illustration a lot of times. We make it very visual so that the help things of the illustrations with the content together, they pair so well. So we want to make sure their audience is engaging with the content and they know exactly what we're explaining. And of course, incorporate as much as we can colors, but being mindful of how our audience will perceive the colors, because a lot of times they print black and white, or maybe this is just going to be a digital version. And so that becomes a little bit irrelevant depending on the way that they will be delivered to our audience. Lastly, one of my favorite parts of the process is when we get to share it with another person in our team or another team inside Broadcat and just get their perspective, get their thoughts on it, because they're brand new to seeing this product that we've created that Jennifer and I have been working on. And so they get us that honest feedback that we need in order to create something that is impactful. And from there, Jennifer and I take it to the final step, which is revise and edit it as much as possible. And of course, at the end of the day, we try to test it, like I said, with a lot of people within our organization to make sure it's still being as impactful as we want it to.
That sounds suspiciously like the process of design thinking you just described. And I don't know if that's by design within the company, but that's exactly the process. And that the last step you just said, Xenia, where you show it to others for feedback, that is the part I think a lot of compliance professionals miss when they will look for training. They'll look for communications and they'll describe what they want, and then they'll get that, but they won't take that next step, which is to get the feedback, and which is what I find the power of design thinking and leading to that positive user experience. I wanted to ask you, I tried to articulate this, but having a designer as a part of these conversations, and I think it's important because when I say something from my legal perspective, that's how it's going to come out. And if Xenia can't understand it, probably the user can't understand it. And if she translates it in a way that is completely different than I may have thought, that message can even be made more powerful. And is that sort of the internal experience of Broadcat?
Oh yeah. That I think is the secret sauce, is that back and forth and the community of diverse voices that we have, because we all have such unique experiences in our professional backgrounds. Coupled that with just this real intent focus on trying to help organizations make these communications as simple, easy, straightforward, and at the end of the day, effective as possible, because it's really what they need to do. And what we're trying to achieve as compliance practitioners across the board is to get that right message to the right people at the right time. And that's when you can really start to see that. And coming into this Broadcat universe, both first as a client and now as a member of the team, has been just eye-opening to me in my compliance career and my professionalism on just what you were saying. We're going to lose if we can't make that point that we're trying to get across clear to the audience and make it relevant to the audience. That we're not going to end up getting the behaviors that we're looking for. We're not going to end up getting the outcomes that we're achieving from a business perspective or a personal perspective. And so blending that design method, thinking in that way, being collaborative with each other, being open with each other, and then doing that same thing on the backside with our clients too. As soon as our clients see these pieces, we want their feedback as well. And that helps us to continually improve it and make sure that it's meeting the needs of their organizations too. That's the secret sauce. That's the thing that makes Broadcat successful and a really awesome place to work with and work for.
And I'm just going to add one of the most unique products and services in the compliance space. So, ladies, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time this week, or excuse me, for this episode. But I hope our listeners will join us for our next episode, where I'm thrilled to have Alex Klingelberger, who will talk about effectiveness redux. But before we leave, if our listeners wanted any more information on any of the topics we touched on, what would be the best place for them?
I think heading to our website is the best place to start getting that information. And that is thebroadcat.com, all spelled out, The Broadcat. And so that's where you'll find lots of great information, resources, blog posts, and a little bit about all of us on the team and the perspectives that we bring to compliance. Check that out and let us know what you think.
Jennifer and Xenia, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
This is Tom Fox. I hope you'll join me in part 3, where I visit with J.C. Dempsey on operationalizing compliance. This special 5-part podcast series is sponsored by Broadcat, and you can find out more information on Broadcat at their website, www.thebroadcat.com. This special 5-part podcast series has been a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network.